Yes, thank you everyone for joining and for joining TCRP's first ever State of the State debrief. Last night we heard Governor Abbott give his 2023 State of the State address, outlining his priorities for this legislative session. And unfortunately, a lot of the ways in which he intends to further harm Texans, our communities, and our civil rights. So, in order to unpack all the crazy we heard last night, we have an all-star panel of experts from each of our three programs. First, we'll hear from Jenny Hickson, the Senior Advocacy Manager from our Criminal and Justice program. Next, we'll hear from Roberto Lopez, Senior Advocacy Manager from our Beyond Borders program. And then you will hear from Emily E.B. French, previously known to many of you as Emily E.B., our Senior Election Protection Attorney and Policy Counsel in the Voting Rights Program. So, Jenny, why don't you kick us off? I have a feeling that from a criminal and justice perspective, you did not approve of much, or maybe even anything of what you heard last night.
No, I think that's a safe bet. Well, Governor Abbott again highlighted that one of the main issues that he's going to be addressing on his emergency list is tightening up and hardening bail standards in Texas. So he again kind of hits on this message that somehow having constitutionally appropriate bail, making sure that people who are in pretrial detention are given the opportunity to get out of jail while they wait for their sentencing or wait for their trial. He is again calling on sort of hardening all of those standards so that people remain longer in jail before they've even had a trial, and claiming that that somehow makes the community safer. We know that that's not true. There's a study that was done in Harris County that was very recently released that looked at what happens in communities when you actually make sure that people have an opportunity to get out of pretrial detention and not tie sort of wealth to your access to getting out of jail. And what we found is that in those cases, the community actually becomes safer. That when people have the opportunity to connect with their community, when they have the opportunity to continue to work, when they have the opportunity to continue to support their families, that's better for the community overall. So there's a couple of bills that have already been introduced that are hard on all of the bail reforms. SJR 44, which is a constitutional amendment, was filed by Senator Huffman this week, which would expand the denial of bail and limit the options for judges to use their own discretion in setting bail conditions. Abbott also highlighted in this same sort of collection of things, making sure that there's not the opportunity to have communities determine the most appropriate bail for their community, going after district attorneys that have policies that are responsive to community requests to, for example, decriminalize marijuana, to decriminalize low-level offenses, to decriminalize things that are sort of public, that are not public safety related. So HB 1350 and SB 378 are two bills that would permit the AG to file suit against a DA if they have a sort of policy of declining to prosecute these low-level offenses, which many communities around the state have already said that it is in their best judgment that they would rather that the DA spend their time on other things than prosecuting people for low-level amounts of marijuana. I think the other things that he kind of hit on, which are not directly seem like they're criminal justice related, but are, he repeatedly referenced the concept of a parental bill of rights for parents of kids that are in Texas schools. However, he's also referenced supporting several different bills that would criminalize parents that decide to support their kids in gender-affirming care. So HB 122 would create a criminal offense for physicians that provide gender-affirming care. SB 250 would actually have those physicians then lose their license if they provided that care. And we know that parents are trying to make the best decisions for their kids. That is part of your rights as a parent. It's actually part of your duty as a parent. And so the irony of Abbott saying that parents needed to have rights related to school, but not rights related to providing the best care for their child is pretty rich. see. And so I think that, I saw a question of, do we need to take notes or will we get notes ourselves on these bills? We actually encourage you to join our legislative updates, which we send out, where we send out all of these different bills, all of the updates on the different bills as they move through, and our summaries. There are, of the bail reform bills, and they're actually not, calling them bail reform is not the right language. These are bills that are hardening bail. And making it so that we are continuing in our state to tie how much money you have to whether or not you sit in jail. So we have thousands of people who are sitting in jail for weeks at a time who have not been convicted of any crime. We also know that the longer you sit in jail, the more likely you are to plead to something that you are actually innocent to, because you're trying to get your life back. And so we know that for people that are, sorry about that. For people that are sitting in jail, that there's a lot of negative consequences. So we'll be happy to share those bill numbers with you as we go.
Your dog is protesting, I think, Jenny.
Yeah, she's very upset. Her name is Eleanor Roosevelt, so she has a lot of feelings about human rights.
It honestly mirrors the primal scream I heard in my own mind during much of last night.
It's true.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Next, we'll turn it over to Roberto. What we just heard from Jenny was pretty grim. Was it any better from Beyond Borders' perspective?
No, it's equally. It's just, yeah, it's bad. Myself, I was born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley, so on the Texas border, and lived there for most of my life. And as I've grown up, we've seen the rhetoric be ramped up like crazy. We've seen border walls come up, concertina wire. We've seen our border become more militarized than it has ever been before. At the federal level, the United States government is providing the most funding it's ever given to agencies like Border Patrol or ICE, and the state government seems very proud to be replicating it and to be calling the federal government a failure, when both entities are doing the most to harm border communities by putting more anti-immigrant policies into effect, by championing and using fentanyl as an excuse to go and police and hunt down immigrants. I think what we saw last night at the State of the State, Governor Abbott gave a pretty emotional appeal about fentanyl, and it is a horrible situation that we're seeing across our country. But the solutions that he is providing is exactly opposite of what is needed. Fentanyl comes in through ports of entry. It comes in through U.S. mail. People use it because people come in contact with it, sometimes because of addiction. We need to be investing money into our communities, into mental health care, into checking at ports of entry or checking U.S. mail. If they're that concerned about fentanyl, then that's what they should be doing. I was I was watching a field hearing this last week, and one congressman talked about how there was a young man who died from fentanyl poisoning because he took a Percocet that he got from a dealer, and the reason why he took it was because he couldn't afford the actual health care. He needed pain medication, but couldn't actually get it because he was uninsured, and that's what led him to come into contact with fentanyl. And yet we don't hear anything about changing the fact that Texas is consistently the highest, has the highest uninsured rate across the country. And so, things like that, it just kind of shows that what the governor is doing on the border is just a political game. It's just for his own benefit. He is taking advantage of immigrants by busing them across the country to Kamala Harris's house. He's using migrants as props. He is actually making the situation worse on the border by antagonizing and attacking the actual, humanitarian groups who are the ones actually solving the issue, who are providing the humanitarian relief that is actually needed on the border. I think one thing that I didn't fully appreciate until recently, and I've been learning about this more, just as I've been here at the Texas Civil Rights Project, but the situation on the border, it's border Texans and incredible people from all across the world who are coming to the border and actually building up the emergency infrastructure that exists there. The federal government, the state government does not provide that. This comes from people who are working who are just like so many hours each week to support immigrants and to feed and to clothe people. And yet the state government is just not addressing that at all. We have a $4.6 billion proposed budget this year for border security, the highest that the state has ever seen it. And what we saw yesterday, Governor Abbott was just lauding that as a success when really it is doing everything that is just opposite to what he supposedly cares about. I think that I think what we really need are Texas communities to really talk about the real issues that are going on, the needs that everyone has, and we need to be showing up at the legislature and testifying and sharing our stories and fighting these bad bills that we're seeing. And if you can, sign up for our list so that way you can learn more about these. And I'm also happy to answer questions as well on other bills or any, the border is a big topic, and so there's so much there. So it's good to be able to share a little bit against what the governor said yesterday, and I'm glad to be on this panel with y'all.
Roberto, I think one of the most outlandish things I have ever heard in my life was last night when Governor Abbott, in one breath, praised how for 200 years people have come to Texas to find refuge and freedom and ways to better their lives. And then in the very next breath said that he was determined to make sure that never happens again. The cognitive dissonance was unbelievable. Next, we'll turn to Emily in our voting rights program. So Emily, we didn't hear a lot from the governor about voting and elections last night. Why do you think that is?
James, I think that Governor Abbott didn't talk about voting rights last night for the same reason that Idris Elba doesn't give a lot of interviews about the 2019 film Cats, which is that we as humans don't like to talk about our failures. And voting rights is certainly an area where Governor Abbott has failed. In 2021, the legislative session went on for months longer than scheduled because Governor Abbott called 2 extra special sessions to get SB 1 passed and then another just for good measure. SB 1 was Governor Abbott's big fix, right? That's his big, we're going to fix elections in Texas. And it was a disaster for Texas voters. In the March 2022 primary, we saw 12,000 ballot applications at least rejected across Texas, 24,000 actual mail ballots rejected. And in Texas, the only people who can vote by mail are people with disabilities, the elderly, anybody over 65, including the young people over 65. I don't mean to say that they are all elderly. College voters, heavily pregnant voters can vote by mail. All these people were disenfranchised by seeing their mail ballots rejected because of an ID provision in SB 1 that simply doesn't work. Even in November, when everybody was like, oh, well, now we know about it, everything will be fine. The vote by mail rejection rate was still 3 times higher than at the same time in 2022 or in 2020. That's not even accounting for all the people who were discouraged by the way the primary went and decided not to apply to vote by mail in November. Last night, Governor Abbott not only didn't mention this at all, he didn't propose a fix for these disabled, elderly, heavily pregnant college voters. We heard nothing from him on that. Governor Abbott handled voting rights in 2021 the same way that he's going to handle bail, the same way that he's going to handle Operation Lone Star and his big border crisis that Roberto just mentioned is not the crisis he thinks it is. He solves the problem that isn't the real problem, and he solves it with an incredibly sloppy solution that's full of holes, and then he never mentions the holes again, right? And if we have all this incredible surplus of taxpayer money, oh my gosh, way to go, everybody. Why isn't that going to things that could actually improve voting, right? Why don't we have online voter registration? Oklahoma has online voter registration. Why doesn't Texas have online voter registration? Why aren't we bolstering our high school voter registration program with, for the teachers who are so overworked and underpaid, why isn't he making high school voter registration easier? Why aren't we putting college campus polling places at every college campus in Texas? Why aren't we helping voters with disabilities with a more robust curbside voting program? Why, if one thing we always see is long lines, is some of that money not going to more polling places in each county, which would be shorter lines at each polling place? I have plenty more words about voting rights than Governor Abbott did last night, but I am, not surprised, just disappointed.
Thank you, Emily. With that, I think we can go on to questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, if folks that are watching want to raise their hands, I know a couple of people have typed some, but if you want to raise your hand to ask a question, please do so now. We got a few through the Q&A function, so I'll just bring those up so we can sort of reply in the whole group. Earlier, someone asked if they will get notes on the bill numbers, and if you look at the answers, Roberto dropped in the link where you can sign up for our legislative updates. Savannah also, that was in our chat, I think. I will drop that link in the chat for everyone. 1 second. And then Jenny, I saw you were answering Liza's question. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So her question was about sort of the profitability of the prison industry. And I think it's important to note that it is an industry. There are organizations and businesses that make a lot of money off keeping people in jail. Texas has more folks in jail than other democracies in the Western world. We hold a huge percentage of the people in our community in jail, and a lot of those people are in pretrial detention. And there's a lot of money that's being made off of holding people in cages. So when we think about who has vested interests in this system, the people that are being targeted by the criminal justice system are people who have been historically disenfranchised. They're Black and brown folks that are being gerrymandered, as like Emily can certainly speak to, out of having voting rights. And they're folks that are being targeted by Operation Lone Star. And so these are all the same communities that are then being held in cages in a way that makes money for corporations that continue to support the machine that is creating these policies that keeps them in jail. So it's very much a sort of like the Wizard of Oz, like don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. The way that Abbott tries to say, look over here at all of these people who are these people that are bad and they are causing the problems in our community, instead of focusing on the things that are actually hurting our community, like we don't have living wages, we have housing that's unstable, we have a grid that won't work. All the things that are actually a problem, he tries to cover up by focusing on the people that, are the people that are easy to demonize because they're in jail.
All right, and we're getting more questions. So this one is for Roberto. It's, do you have thoughts on HR 2839, the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act?
I don't off the top of my head. HB 2839.
All right, I will give you a second to look up our summary on that. Someone else had a question on, and this can be for everyone, what are some ways I can get involved in the legislature as an average person?
There are lots of ways. One is you can come testify at hearings. So if you sign up for at the updates link that we provided, we're going to be letting folks know when there are hearings on these bills. And nearly all the time, the public has the right to come and testify for 2 to 3 minutes against the bills. The only hitch is that in most cases you have to appear in person, but that is a very powerful and effective way to make your voice known, and it makes a difference. Other ways are you can contact your state representative or state senator on any of these bills. You can do it by phone, email, or best of all, in person if you want to come to the Capitol. That's some of what we do, is just we knock on the doors of offices and have a chat with them. And I think also talking with your neighbors, community members, posting about these topics on social media are all vital to help spread the word. I don't know if my colleagues have any other ideas, but those come immediately to mind.
I know that in a couple of weeks, we will be hosting a Texas Ledge 101 training. So I will also drop that link in the chat. Another question that we got is more about the timing of the legislative session. So how soon will we see bills coming out of committee?
I think honestly, very soon. So on the emergency items that the governor outlined last night, they can not merely be voted on in committee, but they can be passed now because they are emergency items. There haven't been, except on the budget, there haven't really been any committee hearings yet, but we think those hearings may start as early as next week. Probably not later than the week after that. And I think you can expect bills to start moving at least out of committee at that point. If it's not an emergency item, the legislature can't, as a whole, as a chamber, can't vote on those bills until after March 10th, but the committees can get going on them right away.
All right, and then
Can I, Leticia, on Alex Friedman's question, do you mind if I
go ahead.
tackle that? I hear you. So the question is a sense of futility about any advocacy for progressive causes in the legislature. Are we anticipating any bills that could actually be influenced and shifted from their initial intent? I know that from the outside big picture, the legislature feels like where good ideas go to die. But, you know, we have been able to make real progress in recent years, not the amount of progress or the speed of progress that we would like. But for instance, coming out of the voting rights program, you know, in 2021, they adopted a online vote by mail tracker that has made a real difference in helping voters make sure that they are getting their vote by mail materials when they need them. There was also a change that allowed voters to change their voter registration address online, no matter where they move in Texas. Even on the big bad voter suppression bills, for those who follow the twists and turns of those bills over session, while the final bill was very, very bad, it was nowhere near as bad as the initial versions of those bills, which would have allowed partisan poll watchers to videotape voters and would have caused mass closures of polling place in minority communities. So the progress is not as fast as we would like, but we're able to, at a minimum, kill some really bad ideas, make them less bad, and we're making incremental progress on things. So all hope is not lost, but we need people to continue to try to bend the arc of history, as a great man once said.
And now I'll turn it back to Roberto for his thoughts on the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act, and then have a follow-up on, did Abbott discuss plans for using the budget surplus, especially regarding border issues, if you want to tackle both of those questions?
Yes, so great question on the Bipartisan Border Solutions bill. So that is a federal bill. It's with the U.S. Congress. So it's a little bit different than what we're talking about today, which is the state legislature, but it's still connected. This is one of those things that I think looks very nice. And then just like in practice is just not. It's and also, you know, the authors are Senator John Cornyn is, so, you know, here in Texas Senator, Kristen Sinema in Arizona, and then Representative Cuellar. Anytime you see Representative Cuellar on the bill, like for related to the border, it's kind of an indicator that it's going to be a bad bill. One thing that kind of to get back at what Jenny was talking about with respect to jail and like the industry, it's the same. It's like all the same. It's all connected to like immigration detention centers and immigration prisons, essentially. Like people stay there for years, are a massive industry for corporations like Geo Group, CoreCivic. You know, the border wall is a multi-billion-dollar project that has benefited companies like Hewitt, which even changed its, like, developed a whole shell corporation with its own like logo and everything in the Rio Grande Valley called Southwest Valley Contractors, so that way people wouldn't associate the border wall with Hewitt construction. Cuellar has received like the most money from the defense industry and from like, but specifically companies that prop up the border complex. So like he is very vested in just kind of building more and more detention centers, and that's a big part of the bipartisan border solutions bill. They want to have like major processing centers all along the border, and what that means is like, you know, holding immigrants in larger facilities. I have been inside them, the ones that we have, and they are horrible. People are given, you know, frozen or rotten food. They're held in horrible conditions, you know, like 24/7 lighting, not allowed outside. It's a really bad place, and it seems like he would really just, you know, like to expand it. One other thing too that's really like scary about where we're seeing immigration going, there's a lot of talk about getting more immigration judges and more like, you know, asylum officers. A lot of times, like those asylum officers, they could be deputized like from being Border Patrol agents. So in a sense, it's kind of like a judge, jury, executioner, where like you have the person who's supposed to be enforcing these laws, who is also going to be adjudicating a case, who, like, we hear time and time again that Border Patrol agents say very racist things that like just do not, they're, you know, like the premise of it is that they're pitted against immigrants. Like, you know, they call people illegal, they have guns, they have a whole, like, you know, industry bent on incarcerating people, on jailing immigrants and on detaining immigrants. And that sort of like giving, what this bill would do would give more money to CBP and more resources to Customs and Border Protection. And that is just not the right approach. I think that what people have been calling for on the border is just like, you know, really working with NGOs, with the humanitarian relief organizations to design a humane crossing, you know, process. Like, instead of having a Department of Homeland Security and trying to call everyone, like focusing on like a post 9/11 terrorist model, like we could have a Department of New Americans and figure out how we're going to welcome and help people, and like hire social workers as opposed to more Border Patrol officers who don't have the best track record in terms of how they treat people. And then on the question with respect to Governor Abbott's plans with the legislature, so he is pretty hell-bent on using a lot of the surplus money to really pump up the spending that we have. Border militarization, I think, border spending by the state, the first time I think that the state really got into it and in more of a concerted way, it was $100 million that the legislature had put forward, and this was several sessions ago. I think in the early thousands, or, you know, or like around 2010, somewhere around there. As time went on, it's kind of grown slowly, and it went up to about 800 million. And that was, you know, okay, they're really expanding it. This last session, it's grown from 800 million to 4.6 billion. And I think the governor sees this as a success, as a way to really set himself up for a possible 2024 run, or it's just a way to like feed his base and keep this constant sense of fear among the border of Black and brown immigrants, so to distract as much as possible from all of his failings. And Emily, like, the state is a horrible Cats movie right now. Like that is a very good euphemism. Like people froze in this freeze, like people can't get access to good healthcare. It's a way to, so long as people are talking about the border and are afraid of immigrants who are just trying to seek the liberty that Abbott claims to love. So long as we're all talking about that, we're not talking about the very serious problems that the vast majority of us in the state are having.
The money thing really bothers me, right? Because like just a few weeks ago, I bought a Jackery mobile power station. So it looks, if you've never seen one of these, it looks kind of like a lunchbox, but it's a lot heavier. But it has a lot of power in it, or if the power goes out again. I spent $850 on this thing, okay? Because the state grid might fail at any moment. I drive in, yeah, I know, I'm becoming a prepper. I live in East Austin, and I've had to replace my tires living in this neighborhood more than in the entire time I've driven a car in my entire adult life in just the last few years living here, because the infrastructure is so run down. And so as a taxpayer, to hear that my Texas taxpayer money is being flushed down the drain for this partisan stunt is personally enraging, not to mention the civil rights aspects of it too, which are also mortifying, as you mentioned, Roberto.
And that wraps up all of our questions, and we are at time. So James, do you want to close with some ways that people can get involved?
Yes, thank you, Leticia. First, thank you again, everyone, for joining. So if you would like to stay in touch with us on these issues and become more involved, there are at least two great ways to do it. One is to sign up for our ledge updates on the links that we mentioned before. I'm going to put one of them in the chat right now, and then stay up to date with us on social media, which I'm putting our handle in the chat. That is our handle on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, which I'm told is a social media site that the young people are using. And then that one website above the bit.ly website, TCRP Ledge, it's the first thing in the chat. That will get you our more detailed bill summary updates and hearing committee updates. But with that, thank you all very much for your time, and see you in the fight together. Talk to you later. Bye.